Get out of my formation! Major Voss's voice cut across the field like a blade. He grabbed Captain Evelyn Hart by the arm and shoved her forward hard in front of 398 soldiers, who went dead silent in an instant. You want to play soldier? Fine. Let's see what a desk officer actually does when someone hits back. The crowd held its breath. Sergeant Reed stepped forward. He was twice her size. He moved fast. She moved faster. 3 seconds later, Reed was on the ground and Evelyn was standing over him without a word, without even a changed expression. Voss stared. He had just made the worst mistake of his career. He simply didn't know it yet. Subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started ordinary. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, how completely deceptively ordinary it started. Soldiers arriving at formation, the same way they arrived every morning. Coffee still hot in their hands, some of them breath-fogging in the Colorado cold. The sun not fully risen. The mountains behind Fort Ravenstone catching the first pale light and throwing it back gray and indifferent. 398 soldiers in rows, standing the way soldiers stand, when they've done something so many thousands of times, it no longer requires thought. Captain Evelyn Hart took her place in formation the way she always did. No ceremony, no announcement. She was 32 years old, medium height, and she had the kind of face that people forgot 10 minutes after meeting her, not because she was unremarkable, but because she had practiced for a long time being exactly what she needed to appear to be. An intelligence officer, a paper pusher, someone who studied maps and compiled reports and stayed out of the way. She had been at Fort Ravenstone for 11 weeks. In 11 weeks, she had not volunteered for anything visible. She had not told stories. She had not tried to impress anyone over dinner or after PT. The other officers had tried to pull her out a few times in the early weeks. Come to the range, Hart. Let's see what you've got. And she had declined politely, consistently, with enough humor to avoid seeming arrogant and enough deflection to avoid revealing anything real. The soldiers in her immediate circle had mostly stopped wondering about her. Major Alexander Voss had not. He stood at the front of that formation, and Evelyn watched him, the way she watched everything, cataloging, measuring, not visibly paying attention. She had been watching Voss since her 3rd day at Ravenstone. She understood him now the way she had learned to understand difficult men in difficult places, by the gap between what they said and what they needed people to believe about them. Voss was 51. He had deployed 3 times and fought hard during 2 of them. He had a silver star on his record and a pattern of behavior that the star tended to insulate from serious scrutiny. He believed in a specific version of strength, loud, demonstrable, physical, because that version had protected him when he was young and hungry and needed the army to see him clearly. He had built his leadership around that belief. He punished ambiguity. He distrusted anything he couldn't directly measure. He distrusted Evelyn Hart. She had known it since week 1. The inspection began at 06:30, and for the first 20 minutes, it was exactly what it appeared to be. Voss moved through the rows, stopping here and there, correcting posture, questioning a corporal about maintenance schedules, dressing down a lieutenant for a report filed with insufficient detail. The soldiers near Evelyn didn't pay her particular attention. She was simply present. Another officer in the line. Then Voss changed direction. He was still 10 rows away when she registered the shift in his trajectory. She kept her eyes forward. She controlled her breathing. She had a specific kind of discipline that came not from training alone, but from years of understanding that every room she entered someone was watching, and that her survival sometimes depended on being the only person in that room who knew exactly what was about to happen before it happened. He stopped in front of her. The formation adjusted without being told. Attention sharpened the way it always does when a commander singles someone out. 398 pairs of eyes found her face. "Captain Hart," Voss said. "Sir?" "Tell me something." His voice was casual in the way that nothing casual ever is. "You've been in my unit for what, 3 months now?" 11 weeks, sir. 11 weeks. He nodded slowly, like he was working through a complicated problem. "And in 11 weeks, what exactly has your presence here contributed to the operational readiness of this unit?" She kept her face neutral. My most recent threat assessment identified a supply route vulnerability that I asked about operational readiness, he said, cutting across her cleanly. Not paperwork. A few soldiers shifted. Not many. The ones who had been in his formations long enough knew to stay perfectly still when his voice took on that particular texture. Intelligence work is operational readiness, sir. That's a nice way to say you sit behind a desk. He wasn't finished. She knew he wasn't finished, so she didn't respond. She let the silence breathe and watched him mistake her stillness for submission. You've got a combat action badge on your file, he said. That right? Yes, sir. 1. Yes, sir. And before you came here you were at where was it? Some analysis center. I was reassigned from a previous posting, sir. Previous posting. He turned slightly, letting the formation hear him better. That mean you can tell me where you were, or is it the kind of work where you studied pictures from satellites and called it combat experience? The laugh came from somewhere in the back third of the formation. Low, careful, the kind of laugh that wants to go unnoticed. Voss didn't look toward it. He didn't need to. The laugh did exactly what he wanted it to do. Evelyn felt it move through her, that sound, not because it wounded her, but because of what it confirmed. She had seen this before. In other rooms with other men in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a Colorado training field. She understood the architecture of it. The public setting, the audience, the questions designed not to get information, but to perform superiority in front of witnesses. She had watched it done to other people. She had once watched it done to a woman in a room in Amman, whose real name she was never permitted to know, and that woman had sat through 20 minutes of it without changing her expression. And afterward, when they were alone, that woman had said to her, "Never let them see you look for the exit." She was not looking for the exit. I can tell you what's relevant to this unit's mission, sir. My previous posting is classified. Classified. He said the word like it was a polite term for fiction. Right. He looked her over, a specific, deliberate look that she recognized as meant to make her feel like a specimen. So what I've got is an intelligence officer with a classified past, no visible combat presence in my unit, and a desk full of reports that my analysts tell me are thorough, but that I've never seen generate one actionable lead in the field. The supply route assessment from 3 weeks ago directly informed, did it save one life? His voice sharpened. Did it put one of my soldiers in a safer position on a patrol? She paused for exactly 1 second. It prevented a convoy from using a compromised route on the 17th. I got a report that said take alternate route. I get 20 reports a week that say take alternate route. He stepped closer. Not close enough to violate any clear line, but close enough to make the geometry of the confrontation unmistakable. What I'm asking is whether you are actually a soldier, Captain, or whether you are someone who wears the uniform and fills the space and collects the paycheck. The formation was very quiet. She met his eyes. She held them. I am a soldier, Major. Prove it. The words landed in the cold air and stayed there. She heard the formation as a collective inhale. Almost 398 people recalibrating what they thought they were watching. Because those 2 words changed things. They were no longer watching a superior officer quiz a subordinate about her record. They were watching something become a test. Voss had already decided what kind of test. We've got a combatives demonstration scheduled for this afternoon, he said. I'm moving it to now. He raised his voice to carry across the formation. We're going to use this as an opportunity to see what our intelligence section looks like under pressure. Captain Hart, you will participate. She said nothing. Sergeant Reed. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed was 27 years old, a combatives instructor who held a level 3 qualification, and who had the kind of physicality that made people on the wrong side of him very briefly regret their life choices. I was also, Evelyn had observed over 11 weeks, a man with an underdeveloped cruelty instinct. He didn't like hurting people he didn't think deserved it. He stepped forward from the first row. He looked at her, and she saw it, the discomfort. He was following an order, and he was not happy about what the order required of him. Yes, sir, he said. Full demonstration, Voss said. Training rules. But let's see what the captain's made of. The formation shifted into a loose circle. That happened fast. Soldiers know how to arrange themselves for a show. The morning cold became something else because enough bodies crowded close enough generate their own heat, and because this kind of attention has a temperature. Evelyn stepped into the circle. She did not stretch. She did not shake out her arms, or bounce on her heels, or perform any of the physical theatrics that men in circles like this often performed to signal readiness. She simply stood, and she looked at Marcus Reed, and she waited. Reed rolled his shoulders. He was, she could tell, planning to be careful, planning to be controlled, planning to go light enough that if this was what it looked like, a setup, a humiliation, an officer being thrown to the wolves on a morning when the major wanted an example, then he wouldn't be the one who made it ugly. She respected that about him. "Sergeant Reed," she said quietly enough that the outer ring of the formation had to lean slightly to hear. "You can stop being careful." He blinked. "Captain, you're pulling your approach. You don't need to. Go ahead." He studied her for a moment. Made a decision. He came forward faster than he'd initially intended, she could tell, because she'd given him permission, and he was a professional, and professionals respond to permission differently than they respond to obligation. His first movement was a drive weight forward, intended to take her off balance at the initial point of contact. She wasn't there. She moved left, not back. A small movement, precise, and her hand found his forearm, and she used his momentum as the instrument rather than resisting it. He went past her, and she adjusted her grip, and for a moment they were turning together, and then he was on the ground, and she was upright, and there was a pause. She stepped back from him. The pause extended. She heard it in the formation, not a cheer, not a laugh, not a gasp exactly. Something more complicated. The sound of people updating an assumption in real time. Reed sat up. He was not hurt. He was thinking. "Again," she said. He got up. He came again, and this time he didn't pull anything. This time he brought everything he had because she'd told him to, and he was starting to understand she could handle it. And the exchange lasted maybe 8 seconds, and ended the same way. He was on the ground, she was not, and there was no theater in any of it. No flourish. No look toward the crowd to check the effect. She just moved when she needed to move, stopped when there was nothing left to stop, and waited. "That's enough, Sergeant," she said. Reed stood slowly. He brushed the Colorado dirt off his sleeve. He looked at her with an expression she knew well, the expression of a person revising a significant portion of what they thought they knew. He said, "Yes, ma'am." Not "Yes, Captain." "Ma'am." Voss was very still. The formation was very still. She turned to face him. Not with aggression, not with triumph, because neither of those things were what she felt. She felt tired in the specific way she always felt, when she had to use something she'd worked hard to keep hidden, and she felt the familiar small grief of knowing that whatever came next, the 11 weeks of ordinary, were over. "Will that do, sir?" she said. His jaw was set. His eyes were working. She could see him processing the data of what he'd just watched running hard against the framework of what he'd believed before watching it. "Where," he said slowly, "did you learn that?" "I had a good teacher," she said, and she said nothing else. She stepped out of the circle. She returned to her place in the formation. She stood the way she'd stood before, unremarkable calm, her face doing nothing in particular. But the space around her had changed. She could feel it. The slight repositioning of bodies. The quality of the attention that now came toward her from every direction. 11 weeks of being overlooked, compressed, and released in 8 seconds, and now something different had taken its place. Not fear. Not quite respect yet. Something more precise than either. What exactly did we just see? The question moved through the formation like a current, and nobody asked it out loud, and nobody needed to. Voss collected himself. He was good at that. She had observed it before, his ability to reassemble his command presence after something disturbed it. He turned back to the formation, and he gave the orders for the morning's training schedule, and he used the voice of a man who had not just watched his assumptions get rearranged by a woman he had spent 11 weeks underestimating, but his eyes found hers once before he turned away. And in that fraction of a second, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not just wounded pride. Not just surprise. Something that looked briefly almost like fear. The rest of the morning unfolded around her like weather-present ambient impossible to avoid. She went to the range with the rest of the intelligence section. She sat through a briefing on the week's training priorities. She ate in the mess hall at 11:30, and she chose a table near the window, and she was alone for approximately 3 minutes before Sergeant First Class Donna Watkins sat down across from her uninvited. Watkins was 44 years old, the senior NCO in the fire support element, and she had been at Ravenstone for 6 years. She had a way of sitting that made it clear she had no intention of leaving. "So," Watkins said. Evelyn looked up from her tray. "Sergeant?" "I've been watching you for 11 weeks, Watkins said. "You know that." "I suspected." Watkins considered something. "I told Kowalski back in September that there was something off about you." "Off. Not bad off, just off. Like you were being careful in a way that most people aren't careful." She pointed her fork in a direction that probably indicated someone who wasn't present. "Kowalski said I was seeing things." "What do you think now?" Watkins looked at her. "I think Kowalski owes me $20. She set her fork down. "Reed's a level 3, you know that." "I know." "And you put him down twice in under 10 seconds combined." Evelyn ate. She said nothing. "Where were you?" Watkins said. "Before here." "I'm not able to—" "I know you're not able to tell me. I'm not asking for a unit designation." Watkins's voice dropped, not because she was being secretive, but because she had shifted into the register of someone who had figured out something important and was deciding whether to say it plainly. "I'm asking because I've been in this army for 22 years, and I know what different kinds of training look like in a person's body. And what I saw this morning wasn't combatives training. That wasn't a certified technique. That was something someone taught you somewhere specific because you needed to know it." The mess hall moved around them. Trays voices the institutional clatter of feeding several hundred people efficiently. Evelyn looked at Watkins for a long moment. "I was somewhere specific," she said, "and I needed to know it." Watkins sat back. She picked up her fork again. "Okay," she said. "That's enough." She ate for a moment. "Voss is going to push you." "I know. He doesn't handle being surprised well. He'll need to explain what happened this morning to himself in a way that makes it not what it actually was." "That's predictable." "Yeah, but predictable doesn't mean harmless." Watkins gave her a level look. "He's going to find a way to make this morning your problem." Evelyn set her own fork down. She looked at the mountains through the mess hall window, the gray ridgeline, the sky above it pulling toward blue as the day warmed. She had been in places where the mountains were different colors, and the sky was different kinds of hostile, and the room she sat in had no windows at all. She had sat in those rooms and eaten whatever was available, and had conversations like this one, where someone perceptive said, "Be careful," and meant it genuinely, and she had learned to receive that kind of warning with the seriousness it deserved. "He can push," she said. "That's all right." "You sure about that?" She picked up her fork again. "I've been pushed before," she said. She had been. That was the thing she carried that no one at Ravenstone knew she carried. She didn't think of it as a burden exactly, more like ballast. The weight in the bottom of a boat that keeps it from capsizing when the water gets rough. The thing she had been before she came here was not a secret she kept because she was ashamed of it. She kept it because she had been told to, and then she had continued keeping it because she had discovered over time that the secret itself was useful. That being the person people underestimated gave her access to information and room to operate that she would not have had if she'd arrived anywhere trailing her actual history. She had spent 4 years in a unit that officially did not exist in any budget document available to anyone without a specific clearance. The unit's function was to go places that the Army could not officially send people and determine things that the Army could not officially ask. She had done this in 8 countries. She had spent 14 months of her life in circumstances where discovery would have meant at minimum imprisonment. She had made decisions in those months that she still reviewed in the particular hours between 3 and 5 a.m. when sleep became unreliable. She had come back from all of it. She had asked to come back to something quieter, and they had placed her here at Fort Ravenstone with a cover role as a tactical intelligence officer and instructions to do the job well and stay beneath the radar. She had done exactly that for 11 weeks. Major Voss found her at 16:30. She was at her desk in the intelligence shop, working through signals intercepts from a recent exercise, and she heard him coming because she was always, even here, listening for what was approaching. He knocked once, a formality, and opened the door before she could respond. "Captain Hart." She turned in her chair. "Sir." He stepped inside. He left the door open, which was either a social signal or a legal one, and she suspected both. He was carrying himself differently than he had at formation. The hard architecture of that morning's confrontation, replaced by something more deliberate, more managed. He had been thinking about how to handle this. "This morning," he said. "Sir, you made me look like an idiot." She waited. "I'm not asking for an apology," he said, and she could tell that was true. He wasn't. He was doing something harder. He was trying to understand something. "I'm asking you to help me understand who I'm actually dealing with, because what I saw this morning is not consistent with the file I have on you." "My file has some gaps, sir." "Apparently." He sat down, not behind her desk, but in the chair across from it, which was another signal. He was not here as a commander enforcing a hierarchy. He was here as a person trying to recover information he hadn't known he was missing. "Those gaps, are they the kind I can ask about?" "Not in detail, sir." "No." His jaw worked. "You have a classification code on your record that I had to look up, Captain. I've been in this army for 28 years, and I had to look up the code." She said nothing. "It means," he started. "I know what it means," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long time. She let him look. She had nothing to hide from him. Not really the classification-protected information, not character. He could see exactly who she was in this room. She had no interest in performing anything. "Why are you here?" he said. "Ravenstone." "Yes. I was assigned here, sir." "By whom?" "People above my pay grade and yours," she said. Not unkindly. "I'm not being evasive for the pleasure of it. I'm telling you what I'm permitted to tell you." He sat with that. She watched him process it, the pride in him and the intelligence in him at war with each other, because the pride wanted to push back, and the intelligence was starting to recognize that pushing back would not change what was true. "You could have stopped it this morning," he said. "You could have said something that would have made me back down." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him directly. She thought about the honest answer, and she gave it. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," she said, and because the unit needed to see something they'd believe. Something moved through his expression. Complicated. Layered. She had seen that look before too, the specific look of a powerful person encountering the limit of what their power could get them and being surprised by the view. "The unit," he repeated. "There are 398 soldiers out there who will operate better or worse based on what they believe about who's beside them. That matters more than whether you and I are comfortable with each other, sir." He stood. He stood slowly, and he straightened his jacket, and he looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something unfinished in it. Something that told her this conversation was not over, that it had barely started. That the real reckoning between them was somewhere ahead in the weeks that remained. At the door he stopped. "Captain Hart," he said. "Sir, what was the mission?" He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the open door, the hallway beyond it. "The one they pulled you out for. The one before all this." She was quiet for long enough that he started to turn. "It doesn't have a name anymore," she said. He turned to look at her. Fully. For just a moment she thought he was going to ask more. She could see the question forming, the genuine human need to know, pressing against the disciplined officer's understanding of what he was and wasn't entitled to. He didn't ask. "Good evening, Captain," he said. "Good evening, Major." He walked out. She listened to his footsteps recede down the hallway, even measured a man with a great deal to think about. She turned back to her intercepts. Outside the intelligence shop window, the Colorado sky was losing its light, going from deep blue to something darker, the mountains silhouetting against it. Somewhere in the post, 398 soldiers were doing the things soldiers did in the evening, cleaning weapons, calling home, sitting with each other, and talking about what they'd seen that morning. She knew they were talking. She'd seen the looks in the mess hall, in the hallways, in the brief moments when her path crossed theirs, and they had to decide what to do with the knowledge their eyes had given them. Some of them would file it away and forget it. Some of them would wonder. And a few, the ones who paid close enough attention, the ones whose survival instincts were well calibrated, would understand that what they'd seen that morning was not a small thing. That the woman sitting in the intelligence shop, surrounded by intercepts and threat assessments and maps of places she'd actually been, was not what she had appeared to be, was not perhaps something any of them had a proper framework for yet. She pulled up the most recent assessment file and scrolled past the data she'd already processed to the section she hadn't. The work was real. She took it seriously. Whatever else she was also what she appeared to be, an officer who did her job, who cared about the people around her operating safely, who had chosen this quieter work for reasons she didn't regret. She just did it with more behind her than anyone knew, for now. The file continued to the next page. She read, "Outside the mountains, disappeared into the dark. And somewhere in Fort Ravenstone, Major Alexander Voss sat alone with everything he thought he knew about strength and rank and what a leader was supposed to look like, and for the first time in a very long time found the certainty in those thoughts not quite as solid as it had always been. He would not admit this to anyone, but he was already asking a different question than the one he'd walked onto that training field with. He had gone out there to show them who was strong. He had come back needing to understand who she was. That difference was not nothing. It was in fact everything. The story that spread through Fort Ravenstone that evening did what all true stories do. It changed shape with every retelling, picked up detail here and lost accuracy there, until by the time it reached the far barracks, it had grown into something almost mythological. But the essential fact at its center remained intact, no matter who was telling it. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed, Level 3, Combatives Instructor, 63. Confirmed competition matches without a loss. In the last 4 years, had hit the ground twice in under 10 seconds combined, and the woman who put him there had done it without raising her voice, without changing her expression, and without, as far as anyone watching could determine, breaking a sweat. Reed himself said nothing publicly. That silence was its own kind of testimony. By 2100 that night, Evelyn knew the story had completed its circuit of the post because Lieutenant Danny Okafor knocked on the doorframe of the intelligence shop. She was still there. She was often still there at 2100 because the work didn't keep office hours, and stood in the hallway with the specific posture of someone who has something they want to say and isn't sure of the protocol for saying it. "Lieutenant," she said without looking up. "Captain Hart, sorry to bother you, ma'am." "You're not bothering me." She looked up then. Okafor was 24 years old, one of the fire support lieutenants, the kind of young officer who compensated for his uncertainty by working twice as hard as anyone required him to. She had watched him over 11 weeks with quiet attention. He was going to be good at this eventually. "What do you need?" He stopped, started over. "I wanted to say something about this morning." "Okay. What you did?" He hesitated. "I've been in the Army 3 years. I've never seen anything like that. And I wanted you to know that a lot of us, we noticed." What it took to stand there and let him. Another stop. He was choosing his words carefully, the way junior officers learned to when they were discussing something involving someone senior to them, regardless of who was in the right. To stand there and not say anything, when you could have. She looked at him. "You think I should have said something?" "I think you could have," he said. "I think you knew something we didn't know and you let him." He made a small gesture. It was like watching someone stand in the rain and choose not to open an umbrella. That was, she thought, not a bad way to describe it. "Sit down, Lieutenant," she said. He looked surprised, but he came in and sat in the same chair Voss had occupied 4 hours earlier. "Why do you think I transferred here?" she said. He thought about it seriously. She could see him thinking, not giving a reflexive answer. That was one of the things she'd noticed about him. "I assumed reassignment," he said. "Reassignments happen for reasons. What would be a reason to put an intelligence officer with my classification code into a unit like this one?" He sat up slightly. He was catching something in the question. "You're not just here to analyze terrain and enemy patterns." She said nothing. "You're here to observe something." He said it slowly, like someone walking out on ice and testing the thickness. "Or someone." She said nothing. He sat with that for a moment. The weight of it settled on him visibly in his posture, in the way his eyes moved slightly to the middle distance as he worked through the implications. "The supply route assessment," he said. 3 weeks ago. That was real. Everything I put in writing is real," she said. "I don't do anything halfway." He looked at her. "But that's not all you're doing." She closed the file she'd been working on. She folded her hands on the desk. She looked at Danny Okafor directly the way she looked at people when she needed them to hear something clearly. "What I'm telling you right now," she said, "you keep to yourself." "Yes, ma'am. I'm here because someone sent me here for a reason. I'm doing my job because it matters. Everything else this morning, what you think you understand about what I am, you file that away and you let it be what it is." She paused. "But I'll tell you this. The work your unit does in the field is only as good as the intelligence that supports it. And the intelligence is only as good as the person compiling it actually understanding what the field looks like. I understand what it looks like." Okafor was quiet for a beat. "The classification code on your file," he said. "Don't look it up," she said. "Whatever result you get won't tell you anything useful, and the search itself will be logged." He blinked, looked at her, then slowly, very slowly nodded. "Good evening, Lieutenant," she said. "Good evening, Captain Hart." He stood, and at the door he turned back for just a moment. "For what it's worth," he said. "Everyone in the platoon was on your side this morning, even the ones who didn't show it." She nodded once. After he left, she sat for a while with the quiet around her, which was not quite empty. She thought about everyone was on your side, and the complicated reality that side-taking in a formation happened after the fact, after you'd already stood through the moment alone, after the cost had already been paid. People's sympathies ran retrospective. They supported you once you'd survived, which was a form of support worth having, but not the one that kept you standing in the cold, while a decorated officer turned 398 witnesses into an audience. She understood it. She didn't resent it. She went back to work. Voss ran the 0600 PT session himself the next morning. This was not unusual. He ran it personally 2 or 3 times a week because physical training was one of the few contexts where he was unambiguously in his element, and he knew it. He lead the formation hard. 6 miles with intervals, the kind of pace that sorted the unit by conditioning fast and without sentiment. Evelyn ran at the back of the intelligence section, which was her standard position, and she ran the 6 miles at the pace the formation required, and she did not make a show of it. But Voss was watching her. She knew he was watching her because she knew how to feel observation without looking for its source, and she knew by now the specific quality of his attention. Deliberate probing, searching for data points that would help him reconstruct what yesterday had dismantled. He called a water break at the 4-mile mark. She was standing with Sergeant First Class Watkins, who had materialized beside her sometime around mile 2, and simply run there, as though she'd always been running there. "He's clocked you 6 times since the turnaround," Watkins said without moving her lips noticeably. "7, Evelyn said. Watkins looked at her sideways. "Okay then." They drank water. Around them, the soldiers of Fort Ravenstone's most recent rotation caught their breath and made the noises people make at mile 4 of a hard PT run, mostly exhaled and compressed the sounds of bodies processing demand. Corporal Justin Lear materialized on Evelyn's other side. He was 19 years old, 6 months out of O-suit, and he had the quality of someone who had not yet learned that proximity to an interesting person was not the same as permission to speak to them. He was also, she had noted, one of the soldiers who had been standing in the front row that morning. He had a good view of everything. "Captain Hart," he said. She looked at him. He was very earnest. Young people doing something courageous often were. "Corporal." "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "You want to know how I did it," she said. He blinked. "How did you—" "It's what everyone wants to ask," she said, not unkindly. "Go ahead." He glanced once at Watkins, who was demonstrating remarkable interest in the middle distance, and then looked back. "How did you know what he was going to do before he did it?" "I didn't know," she said. "I read him." "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent a long time learning to pay attention to the information a person's body gives you before their conscious mind has finished deciding what to do." She watched his face absorb this. "It's a skill. You develop it by doing it for a long time in places where getting it wrong had consequences." "What kind of consequences?" The question was innocent. Genuinely innocent in the way that 19-year-old soldiers newly graduated from training were genuinely innocent, not stupid, not unaware, but simply not yet in possession of the kind of knowledge that comes from learning what real consequences actually feel like. The kind, she said, that teach you to pay attention. He was quiet for a moment, processing. "Can you teach it?" She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the answer, not performing thought, but actually considering it. "I can teach some of it," she said. His face shifted. He was trying to suppress the response she could see, trying to look professional and measured, but he was 19, and the response won. He looked briefly like what he was, a young man who had just been told something he very much wanted to hear. "Fall in, Corporal." Voss's voice cut across the water break. Lear came to attention reflexively and moved. The formation reassembled around them. The last 2 miles happened at a slightly harder pace than the first 4. Voss always did, the last section. Hard a reminder that finishing well mattered as much as starting well. It was one of his better principles, and she gave him credit for it. She ran, and she thought. She thought about what Okafor had said the night before, and what Lair had just asked, and what Watkins had told her in the mess hall. And she assembled these data points, the way she assembled data points, looking for the pattern beneath the individual incidents, the shape of the thing that the things were individually describing. The unit was orienting toward her, not away from her. Toward. Voss had tried to use the formation as a tool of public diminishment, and the opposite had happened. The event had worked like a reveal, like a curtain pulled aside, like the moment in a particular kind of story, where everyone realizes simultaneously that the person in the unassuming role has been carrying something extraordinary all along. She had not intended this. She had intended to survive the morning with her assignment intact and her cover approximately in place. Instead, she had become overnight the most interesting person at Fort Ravenstone. This was a problem for her work. It was also, she recognized, and here the honest part of herself spoke up clearly, a problem she had partially created. She could have gone down with Marcus Reed. Not been hurt, not lost in any meaningful sense, but simply lost the demonstration, gone to the ground, created a story that was unremarkable, preserved the 11 weeks of invisibility she'd built. She had chosen not to. She had chosen it in a moment, in the space of a second, and the choosing had been instinctive rather than calculated. That was the part she was still examining. Why, when she had maintained her cover through 11 weeks of Voss's pointed attention and deliberate provocation? Why, in that moment, with 398 people watching, had she reached for the truth instead of the fiction? She knew the answer. She had known it since before the run ended. The answer was uncomfortable in the way that true answers sometimes were. She hadn't done it for herself. She hadn't done it for her assignment. She'd done it because Lair was standing there, and Okafor, and the 100-odd young soldiers in that formation, who were watching a decorated officer use his authority to establish publicly, and with all the institutional weight he carried, that a certain kind of person could be dismissed without consequence. She had done it because she was tired of that being the lesson. The run finished at the starting point. Voss called the formation to attention, gave the dismissal, and the soldiers broke for the day's first scheduled block. He walked past her without stopping, but he slowed for a fraction of a second. She noted it. At 100, a man she had never seen before appeared at the entrance to the intelligence shop. How a civilian. Mid-50s, the kind of fit that comes from sustained discipline rather than youth, wearing clothes that were carefully nondescript in the specific way that nondescript clothes become interesting rather than forgettable. He had a visitor's badge on his lapel, and he wore it wrong, too high, clipped at an angle, and that small wrongness told her the badge was unfamiliar to him because he did not normally need one. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a second, neither of them said anything. Then she said, "Close the door." He came in. He closed the door. He sat in the chair across from her desk without being asked, which told her he was not a man accustomed to waiting for permission. "You look tired," he said. "I had an eventful yesterday," she said. His name was Gerald Hatch. She had known him for 7 years, and she did not fully trust him, and she knew he did not fully trust her, and that mutual calibrated distrust was the foundation of the most functional working relationship of her professional life. "Heard about that," he said. "How?" Reed filed an informal incident report. Voss saw it flagged, it sent it up. It got to people who recognized what they were looking at. He looked at her mildly. "You know how I feel about field personnel making themselves visible." "I didn't make myself visible," she said. "Voss made me visible. I made a choice about how to respond. You put a level 3 instructor on the ground twice in a public setting. He was going to put me on the ground once in a public setting if I didn't. You could have taken the fall," he said. "You've done it before." "I know. Why didn't you?" This was the same question Voss had asked, and she gave Hatch a version of the same answer she'd given herself on the run that morning. Not the instinct part, which was hers to understand privately, but the operational reasoning. "The unit needed it," she said. "There's a dynamic here that doesn't support the work if I'm the permanent example of what doesn't matter. What happened yesterday accelerated the timeline, but it also opened access. I couldn't have gotten in another 3 months of being invisible." Hatch looked at her steadily. "That is a post hoc rationalization," he said. "It's also true," she said. He let that sit. He was good at letting things sit. He had a patience that was almost geological. "Where are you with the primary?" he said. 4 weeks out from confirmation. Maybe 3 if I get what I need from the signals work." "You need more time or more access?" "Access," she said. "I need to be in 2 more briefings that I currently have no reason to be in. Yesterday's demonstration may have fixed that." He raised an eyebrow slightly. The eyebrow raise was his version of a strong reaction. "Voss," she said. "He's going to want to know what I am. He's going to try to get access to my record through channels he has and find what he can. And when the gaps confirm there's something he can't see, he'll do one of 2 things. He'll either go cold and formal, treat me like an anomaly that makes him uncomfortable, and manage his exposure, or he'll try to get me closer, try to find out through proximity what documents can't tell him." "And you think he'll choose closer?" "I think he's too proud to choose comfortable distance," she said. "He'll want to understand what he's dealing with. That's both his best quality and his most exploitable one." Hatch was quiet. "You're using the situation you created to access briefings you need," he said. "I'm using the situation that was created by a commander who decided to make his institutional prejudices my problem on a public training ground," she said. "Yes, I'm making use of it. That's what you trained me to do." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. "The primary," he said. "What are we looking at if you're right?" She opened the bottom left drawer of her desk and removed a file that was not registered in the shop's official filing system and placed it on the desk between them. He looked at it without touching it. "That's significant," he said. "It's worse than significant," she said. "If I'm right, and I'm confident I'm right, we have an active leak at the brigade level that has been running for at minimum 14 months. The supply route vulnerability I flagged 3 weeks ago was not accidental. Someone made that route look clean when it wasn't." Hatch picked up the file. He read the way trained people read intelligence assessments. Fast, comprehensive, not moving to the next page until the current one had been fully processed. When he finished, he closed it. He set it back on the desk. He said, "Evelyn." She said nothing. "Tell me you have source protection on this." "Everything that could be traced backward is documented in a way that points to standard signals work," she said. "The analysis conclusions are mine. The sourcing looks like intercept correlation. And the briefings you need." "I need to confirm one more link in the chain," she said. "The supply route is one instance. I have 2 more potential instances that would close the case, but they involve operational planning that hasn't been briefed to my section. I can get you into the briefings, he said. That will raise questions. I'll make it look like a training cross-attachment, he said. Your section is being expanded. You need broader operational context for your analysis work. He stood. He tucked nothing under his arm, picked up nothing, carried nothing. He had brought nothing in with him, and he left with nothing visible. Be careful with Voss. I'm always careful. You put his instructor on the ground in front of his unit, Hatch said. That's a particular kind of not careful. I put his instructor on the ground because his instructor was about to put me on the ground in front of his unit, she said with enough precision that the distinction was clear. That's different. Hatch looked at her with the expression she had catalogued over 7 years, the one that meant he was simultaneously frustrated and not actually sure he could argue the point. 3 weeks, he said. Close it. 2, she said. He looked at her. 2, she said again. He left. The briefing she needed happened 72 hours later. Hatch moved fast when he needed to, and the cover was exactly what he'd said. It would be a cross-attachment request section. Expansion, additional operational context for intelligence support to the upcoming brigade exercise. Her name appeared on the attendee list for the operational planning brief, the way names appear when the paperwork is done correctly, unremarkably. She sat in the back of the briefing room with a notepad, and she listened to 70 minutes of operational planning with the surface attention of someone taking notes for a report, and the interior attention of someone cross-referencing every data point against a mental map she'd been building for 11 weeks and 3 days. The link she needed was in the 15th minute, not the information itself. The information was ordinary, a standard route decision, the kind of operational choice made in 100 planning sessions. It was the choice that mattered, the specific choice of a specific route that she had flagged as compromised 3 weeks ago. The route that the planning brief was treating as clean. Someone in this room, or someone connected to someone in this room, was making sure that route kept looking clean. She wrote a note. She wrote it in the shorthand she'd developed over 4 years that looked to anyone glancing over her shoulder like standard planning annotation. It said confirmed. 3rd instance. Same pattern. She closed the notepad. She looked at the room around her, at the dozen officers and NCOs attending the brief at the S3, running it at the faces of people who had no idea they were being observed by someone who now had enough to write the report that would end one of them. She kept her face completely neutral. She stayed for the rest of the brief. She asked 2 questions, both of them sensible and directly related to her stated reason for being there, and she wrote down the answers. Afterward, she walked back to the intelligence shop, and she sat at her desk, and she opened the file she'd shown Hatch, and she added 3 lines to the summary page. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling. 2 weeks, she'd told Hatch. She was going to do it in 8 days. But there was a complication. There was a complication that had been developing since the morning on the training field, since the conversation with Okafor, since Lear's question, and the run, and Watkins's steady, unremarked presence at her side, and the complication had a name, even if she wasn't ready to say it plainly to herself yet. She had started to care about this unit. That was the complication. Not in a way that would compromise the work she was too trained for, that too disciplined, and the work was too important. But in the way she'd sometimes cared about people in other rooms, in other countries, as a presence beneath the professional overlay, a warmth she didn't manufacture and couldn't entirely suppress. She had watched these soldiers for 11 weeks. She knew who among them called home every night, and who rationed the calls to 1 a week, because the distance was too hard to handle in smaller doses. She knew which of the NCOs ran the informal mentorship networks that the Army never formally recognized, and that kept units functional at a level the org chart couldn't capture. She knew which young soldiers would be excellent leaders in 7 years if someone paid enough attention to them now. She knew which one of them was the source of the leak. She had known for 12 days. She had not told Hatch yet because she was still building confirmation, which was true. She had not told him also because the confirmation she'd built in the last 12 days was sufficient, and she'd spent those 12 additional days hoping she was wrong, which was not something she could afford professionally, and which she was doing anyway. Because the source of the leak was not a bad soldier. The source of the leak was a scared person who had been put in an impossible position and had made a choice that was going to cost them everything. And Evelyn had sat across from enough scared people in impossible positions in her life to understand that this happened. That it was happening did not mean the work became less necessary, but it meant carrying it was heavier. She had been trained to be good at carrying heavy things. She picked up her pen. She opened the next file. She worked until 2200. When she left the intelligence shop that night, Voss was standing in the corridor outside his office. He was not waiting for her, or not visibly. He was reviewing a document. He looked up when she walked past. "Captain Hart," he said. "Sir," she said. "You were in the operational brief today." "Yes, sir." "S3 said your section needed broader context." "That's right." He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes and waited, and she kept her face exactly what it always was, attentive, neutral, giving nothing away that she hadn't decided to give. "I have a question," he said. "Ask it, sir." "What are you actually doing here?" She looked at him. She thought about Gerald Hatch and the file in her bottom drawer, and the 12 days she'd spent hoping she was wrong, and the 8 days remaining before she would finish a job that would reach far enough to shake things well above Major Voss's pay grade. "My job," she said. He held her gaze. "Good night, Major," she said. She walked to the exit, behind her. She heard him exhale a long, controlled breath that contained, she suspected, a great many of the things he hadn't yet figured out how to say. She pushed through the door and into the dark. Somewhere above her, Colorado's sky was full of stars that looked nothing like the skies she'd watched from other countries, in other darkness, waiting for different things than this. She walked, and she let herself feel for a moment the full weight of what was coming. Then she filed it, compartmentalized it, set it aside in the specific internal space she'd built over years for things that needed carrying without being held. She had 8 days. She was going to use all of them. 8 days became 6. She hadn't planned for it to move faster. She'd built the timeline around the pace of confirmation, around the careful layering of evidence that made a case airtight rather than merely convincing, and she'd intended to use every hour of the remaining time to be certain in the way that her work required certainty, not probable, not likely, not strongly suggested, but confirmed without room for an alternative explanation. Then the convoy schedule changed. She saw it at 0630 on the 6th day, buried in the updated operational annex that crossed her desk as part of her normal intelligence support function. A routine change on its surface. A resupply convoy rerouted due to weather assessment on the primary road moved to the alternate. The alternate that she had flagged as compromised. The alternate that the operational planning brief 3 days ago had confirmed was being kept artificially clean. The convoy was scheduled for 0400 the following morning. She sat with that for exactly 90 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and crossed every remaining item off her confirmation checklist. Because the convoy schedule change was not a weather decision. She knew it was not a weather decision because she had checked the forecast herself 4 minutes earlier, and the primary road was clear. Someone had changed the route. Someone had made a call or sent a message, or filed a request that moved 23 soldiers from a safe road onto a compromised one, and that someone believed the change would look like standard operations management. It looked like that to everyone except her. She opened the bottom drawer. She looked at the file. She had 8 days' worth of confirmation in it, which was enough. She had known for 12 days who the source was. She had spent 6 of those 12 days hoping she was wrong, and the last 6 building the kind of case that left no room for hope to operate. She closed the drawer. She stood up from her desk and she walked directly to Major Voss's office. His door was open. He was at his desk working through his morning read, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorframe with the specific look of a man who had developed over the past week a complicated and unresolved relationship with her presence. "Captain Hart," he said. "I need 10 minutes," she said. "Uninterrupted. And I need you to make a decision at the end of it." Something shifted in his face. Not alarm exactly, more like the recognition of a register he understood. The register of operational urgency, of someone bringing a real problem at pace, rather than performing the theater of urgency. He set down what he was reading. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. She sat. She didn't bring the file. She'd made that decision in the 30 seconds it took to walk from the intelligence shop to his office. She would give him enough to act on. She would not give him everything until she knew which direction he was going to move. "The convoy running tomorrow morning at 0400, she said. 4th Platoon resupply. Move to alternate due to weather. The weather assessment is inaccurate, she said. The primary road is clear. The route change was not driven by conditions." He looked at her steadily. "The alternate route I flagged 3 weeks ago," she said. "I flagged it because I identified signals pattern indicators consistent with surveillance at 2 points along that route. I reported it was noted, and the route was taken off the primary planning matrix." She paused. "Someone put it back." "Who authorized?" "The authorization trail looks clean," she said. "That's the point. It was made to look like a weather-driven operational adjustment. Standard procedure routine paperwork, no single point of obvious interference." She looked at him directly. "But the weather data doesn't support it. And the signals pattern I identified 3 weeks ago is still active on that route as of 14 hours ago." Voss was very still. "What are you telling me?" he said. "I'm telling you that 23 soldiers are scheduled to run a compromised route tomorrow morning, and that the reason the route is compromised is connected to something I've been building a case on since before I arrived at this unit." He leaned forward slowly. She could see the commander in him rising, not the man who had dragged her in front of 398 soldiers 9 days ago, but the one beneath that, the one who had earned a silver star because he ran toward the problem when other people ran from it. "Before you arrived," he said. "Yes." "This is the actual reason you're here." She said nothing. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched it move through him, the reconfiguration of everything he'd believed about her assignment, her role, her classification code, the gaps in her file that he'd looked up and couldn't read. "The convoy," he said. "What do you need from me?" "Stop it," she said. "Tonight, before anyone knows it's been stopped. Run a maintenance flag on 2 of the vehicles. It happens, it's routine. Nobody questions a maintenance hold at 2200 the night before and 0400 departure. And the real reason? The real reason stays between us until I can close the case," she said. "If whoever changed that route knows the convoy was stopped for the actual reason it was stopped, we lose the confirmation I need. You're running an investigation inside my unit." "Yes." He sat back. He looked at her with something she had not yet seen on his face in 9 days of watching him carefully. Something that was not entirely comfortable, and not entirely hostile, and not entirely anything she had a clean label for. Something that was working its way toward a form she suspected he hadn't predicted for himself. "Someone in my unit," he said. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. He read her non-answer correctly. His jaw set. She watched him process the specific kind of pain that came from that possibility, from the idea that among the people he commanded and trained and believed, he knew someone had compromised an operation in a way that could put his soldiers on a dangerous road at 4 in the morning. "How long have you known?" he said. 12 days, she said. 12. He stopped, started again more controlled. "You've known for 12 days and you're telling me now because the convoy moved up the timeline," she said. "I needed more confirmation. I have enough now. The convoy can't run." "What about after the convoy? What's the next step?" "I brief my chain of command. Not yours, mine. I give them what I have. From there it moves to people above both of us." He was quiet. "Voss," she said. And she used his name, not his rank, which was a deliberate choice that she watched him register. "I know what this is. I know what it cost you to hear that someone here may have done this. I need you to know that everything I've done in this unit, including the last 12 days, has been because these soldiers matter. Not the case, them." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stop the convoy," he said. "Tonight. Maintenance flag. Done." He looked away, then back. "What do I tell the unit?" "Nothing different than what you'd normally say. Maintenance hold convoy rescheduled operations continue." She stood. "And sir, the route change documentation. Don't flag it, don't review it, don't let anyone know. It crossed your desk outside of normal operations review. You don't want whoever did this to know we're looking at it. I need 3 more days, she said. He nodded. She moved toward the door. Hart, he said. She turned. 12 days. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. You knew for 12 days, and you sat in my formation and did PT and filed reports, and you didn't. He stopped. How do you do that? She thought about the answer. The real one. Practice, she said. She left him with that. The maintenance flag went on the vehicles at 21:45. She knew because Watkins texted her she had given Watkins her personal number 4 days after the training field incident for reasons she'd described to herself as operational, and that were at least partly something else. The text said, "Convoy rescheduled. Maint hold." "You know anything about that?" She replied. "I know the primary road is clear." 3 minutes passed. Watkins replied, "Okay." That was the entire exchange. It was enough. She spent the night in the intelligence shop, not working at her desk, thinking mostly. Reviewing the architecture of the case, the way she reviewed things when she was almost done looking for the gap, the weak joint, the place where an alternative explanation could insert itself. She found none. She had built this carefully. She had built it over 11 weeks of cover and 12 days of deliberate confirmation, and she had built it in the particular way she'd learned to build things, so that it would stand without her having to defend it, so that the evidence spoke completely enough that her testimony was secondary. At 0300, when the convoy would have been staging, she went outside and stood in the dark. She thought about the soldier who was the source. His name was Staff Sergeant Anthony Corrigan. He was 38 years old. He had a daughter in Minnesota who was 8 years old and who had drawn pictures for him. She'd seen them taped to his wall during a routine walkthrough of the NCO housing block that she'd done casually, the way she did everything that was not casual at all. He had been with the unit for 4 years. He was competent, not exceptional. He had a gambling debt that he had tried to address through 3 different channels over the past 16 months and been turned away from all of them because the numbers were beyond what any of the standard programs could absorb. Someone had found him in that desperation and made an offer. She did not hate him. She wanted to be clear with herself about that, standing in the Colorado dark, with the mountains she couldn't see but knew were there. She did not hate him. She understood the geography of how a person arrived at a choice like the one he'd made, the narrowing of it, the way the debt closed in and the options ran out, and then the offer appeared specific and practical. And the choice became not whether to cross a line, but whether the line was real or merely a story told by people who'd never been in that position. She understood it. Understanding it did not change what had to happen next. She went back inside. She had work to do. The briefing she gave Hatch happened via secure call at 0700, 7 hours after the convoy was stood down. She gave him everything. All of it. The signals analysis, the route documentation, the pattern correlation across 3 separate incidents. The financial background on Corrigan, the specific mechanism by which the information had been passing, which she'd traced to a communications interval that appeared in the signal's intercepts as background noise, until she'd isolated it and run it against known tradecraft signatures and identified it as deliberate. Hatch was quiet for a long time after she finished. "The route change documentation," he said. "Where does it originate?" "Corrigan's section submitted it," she said. "The authorization above it is clean. Whoever approved it didn't know what they were approving." "But the submission came from his section, and the weather data cited was pulled from a source that I can show was accessed from a terminal in his area at 1940, the night before submission." "You can show that definitively. I can show it in a way that a forensic audit will confirm," she said. "I've been careful about how I document the technical access. It's presented as routine signals correlation. The audit will find it independently." Another pause. "The convoy," Hatch said, "stood down on a maintenance flag. Voss handled it." "You read Voss in." "I read him in enough to stop the convoy," she said. "I didn't give him Corrigan's name." "He'll want it." "I know. That's your conversation, not mine." She paused. Hatch. The convoy had 23 soldiers on it. I wasn't going to let it run. I understand that, he said. I'm not questioning the decision. I'm noting the exposure. Voss will hold, she said. He's already in far enough that backing out serves nothing for him, and he understands what protecting the case means. How sure are you? She thought about the look on Voss's face when she'd said these soldiers matter. Not the investigation. Them. Sure enough, she said. Hatch had another long pause, and in that pause, she recognized the specific quality of silence that preceded a significant piece of information. There's a development you need to know about, he said. She waited. Corrigan isn't the only source, Hatch said. There's a second element we've been tracking from the other direction for 6 weeks. Someone at the brigade level, not the unit level. Corrigan is the conduit. The information is moving through him, but the original access point is higher. She was very still. How high? She said. High enough, Hatch said, that closing Corrigan without closing the other element first will cause the upper source to disappear. They'll burn the connection the moment Corrigan is picked up. She processed this. You've been running a parallel track, she said. We've been trying to run a parallel track, he said. We have the signal, but we don't have the confirmation. What you've built on the unit side is enough to close Corrigan. But if we close Corrigan first, we lose whoever's above him, she said. Yes. She stood up from her chair, sat back down. This was the largest undisciplined physical reaction she'd permitted herself since arriving at Ravenstone, and she noted it the way she noted everything, as data about the state of things. How long do you need on the upper track? She said. A week, possibly 10 days. So we hold, she said. We hold. Corrigan stays in place. You continue operating as normal. And the next convoy. We'll manage routing at the operational level through channels that don't touch your unit, Hatch said. No one will be running that alternate route in the next 10 days. If Corrigan realizes, he won't, Hatch said. As long as your unit behaves normally, which means Voss has to behave normally. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He will, she said. He'll hate it, but he will. I know you believe that, Hatch said. I'm choosing to believe it too. Don't make me regret it. The call ended. She put the phone down. She sat with the new shape of things, the additional 10 days, the second source above Corrigan, the extended period of ordinary behavior required from a unit commander who now knew his unit had been compromised and had to act as though he didn't know. This was the part of the work that didn't fit cleanly in a training module. The part where the human cost of the operation became impossible to arithmetically separate from the operational necessity. She was asking Voss to look at his soldiers every day for 10 more days, knowing what he knew. She was asking Corrigan, who didn't know she'd identified him, to continue operating under conditions that felt normal when nothing about them was. She picked up her pen. She opened a fresh page. She wrote at the top, Day 1 Extended Timeline. She began the next section of the assessment. The unit's daily rhythm continued later when the whole thing was over. How ordinary everything looked when something had already been fundamentally changed. PT at 0600. Briefings. Range rotations. Meals in the mess hall, where Watkins still occasionally materialized beside her without explanation, and Okafor still stopped by the intelligence shop with questions that were real professional questions, and also something else, a kind of regular checking in that she'd stopped discouraging. Corrigan she saw in the ordinary ways. Morning formation. The occasional operational brief. Twice in the hallway where he nodded at her, the way every soldier nodded at every officer, and she nodded back and continued walking. He was living his normal life. She was watching every detail of it. On the 4th day of the extended timeline, Marcus Reed found her at the range. She was running the qualification course alone. This was not something she did often, but she needed the discipline of it, the return to a physical language that her mind understood differently than thought. Reed appeared at the firing line when she was reloading and stood at the edge of what was politely outside her space and waited. She finished the reload. She finished the course. She set the weapon safe and turned. Sergeant Reed, she said. He had the same look he'd had when he'd sat up from the Colorado dirt, the ongoing recalibration. I owe you an apology, he said. She studied him. For what? For the morning on the field. I should have... He stopped. I followed that order and I knew it wasn't right, and I followed it anyway because he outranked me, and I talked myself into believing I could be careful enough that it wouldn't be what it looked like. She waited. It was what it looked like, he said, and I didn't stop it. You couldn't have stopped it, she said. Not without a cost to yourself that he wasn't entitled to put on you. That's a generous read. It's an accurate one. She looked at him steadily. You pulled your approach because you didn't want to hurt someone you didn't think deserved it. That was the right instinct. What happened after was between me and the Major. He looked at her. You're not angry. No. Most people would be. I'm not most people, she said. Not arrogantly. It wasn't arrogance. It was just the simplest, accurate statement she could make. He stood with that for a moment. Then he said, The guys have been talking, not in a bad way. Just people are paying attention now who weren't paying attention before. Lear's been driving everyone crazy asking questions about reading body language. Okafor basically reorganized the way he thinks about intelligence support in the last 10 days. He paused. The unit's different. Different how? She said. He thought about it. Like somebody turned a light on in a room that had always had the curtains closed, he said. She looked at the range. She thought about 23 soldiers who'd been scheduled for an Aero 400 run on a compromised road, and who were here alive, preparing for qualification, because a maintenance flag had gone on a vehicle the night before. Good, she said. She picked up her weapon. She turned back to the range. Reed stayed for a moment, then left without more words. And that was correct. That was what the moment needed to be allowed to be what it was, without additional commentary. She fired. The shots grouped tight. She fired again. On the 7th day, Voss asked to see her. She had been expecting it. The exact timing varied, but the request was inevitable. She had read him accurately, had known since the morning she'd briefed him that the tolerance for uncertainty in a man like Voss ran deep, but not indefinitely, and 7 days was in fact longer than she'd estimated it would take. He closed his office door himself this time. He sat at his desk and looked at her and came directly to it. You found someone, he said. She said nothing. Don't do that, he said. Don't give me the silence. You found someone. You've known for more than 2 weeks. And whoever it is still in my unit walking around, and I am looking them in the face every day without knowing who I'm looking at. He leaned forward. Tell me who it is. I can't, she said. Hart. Closing the unit-level source now closes the case before the upper element is confirmed, she said. There's a second source above your unit. If we move on the first one, the second disappears. We have a 10-day window to close both simultaneously. He stared at her. There's a second source, he said. Above brigade level, she said. He sat back. His chair made a sound under the shift of his weight. She watched him run the calculation. The thing he'd just been told, laid against the thing he'd already known, and the larger shape of the problem that those two things together created. How much higher? He said. I don't know exactly, she said. Hatch is working it from that end. Hatch. He registered the name. Your handler. My contact, she said. Yes. Who does he work for? I'm not able to... I know, he said. He rubbed his face with one hand, a gesture she'd never seen from him before a momentary drop of the command architecture. I know. You can't tell me. He lowered his hand. How do you do this job? How do you sit with all of this, and then go out and do PT and eat in the mess hall and... The same way you lead soldiers into situations where some of them might not come back, she said. You carry it, you don't put it down, and you do what needs to be done in the time you have. He looked at her. 3 more days, she said. Hatch is close on the upper track. And then people above both of us handle what comes next. He was quiet. The soldier, he said. When this is over, when whoever it is gets... He stopped. Something was moving across his face that she recognized because she'd carried the same thing for 19 days now. "They're somebody's family," he said. "Yes," she said. "That doesn't get easier," he said. "No," she said. "It doesn't." Something passed between them in that moment. Not warmth exactly, and not the easy understanding of old friendship. Something more specific and more earned the recognition between two people who had both been in rooms where the right thing and the easy thing were not the same thing, and who had both in their different ways and for their different reasons chosen the right thing and understood what that choice actually cost. Voss looked at his desk. He nodded once. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she said. She left his office. In the corridor, she stopped for a moment, just a moment, the duration of one controlled breath, and she thought about Corrigan's daughter in Minnesota and the 8-year-old drawings on the wall, and she thought about the 23 soldiers who would have been on a road before dawn. She picked a direction. She walked. The next 3 days were going to be the hardest of the assignment, and the assignment had not been easy. But she had learned over a long time in difficult places that the hardest part coming last was not a coincidence. It was because the hardest part was always the one where you could almost see the end and the distance between almost, and there was exactly where everything fell apart if you let it. She was not going to let it. She had come too far. The soldiers behind her. Corrigan, who didn't know she'd found him, and Reed, who was recalibrating, and Okafor with his reorganized thinking, and Lair driving everyone crazy with questions about reading people, and Watkins, who had been watching her for 11 weeks and owed Kowalski $20, all of them were the reason this mattered. She walked toward the intelligence shop. She had 3 more days of work to do. She started. The 3 days didn't hold. On the morning of the second day, Hatch called at 05:12. She was already awake. She had stopped pretending to sleep somewhere around 03:30, when the kind of thinking that the dark hours permitted had become too loud to work against. She picked up on the first ring. "We have a problem," Hatch said. She sat up. "How bad?" "The upper source moved last night, changed his communication pattern, shifted his routing. It's not a full burn, he hasn't disappeared, but he's spooked about something." "Did Corrigan contact him?" "We don't think so. The timing doesn't match any communication interval we have on Corrigan. This looks like the upper source receiving information from a third direction we haven't identified." She was on her feet now, moving. "Which means there's another channel. Which means the network is larger than we thought," Hatch said. "We've been operating on the assumption that it was 2 points. Corrigan at the unit level, the upper source above brigade. But if the upper source is receiving from somewhere we haven't mapped, then we don't know what we're looking at," she said. "We know enough," he said, "but not enough to hold the timeline. If the upper source burns before we confirm, we lose everything above Corrigan." She processed the sequence. The changed communication pattern. The unknown third direction. The upper source's instincts firing on something he'd received from somewhere she hadn't found yet. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "I need you to stay completely still," he said. "Whatever is making the upper source nervous, it didn't come from your work. Your tradecraft has been clean. But if anything shifts in your unit's behavior in the next 24 hours, if Voss changes how he's operating, if anyone in the intelligence section moves differently, Voss will hold," she said. "You said that before. He's held for 7 days on something that is costing him significantly," she said. "He'll hold for 1 more. Hatch was quiet. "The third channel," she said. "What's your read on it?" "Someone the upper source trusts independently of Corrigan," Hatch said. "Someone who has visibility into operations at a level that would let them observe changes and report them upward." She went still. "The convoy stand down," she said. "The convoy stood down on a maintenance flag," Hatch said carefully. "Which is routine. Which is routine, unless someone with operations visibility noticed that the maintenance flag was applied to vehicles that had just been serviced 2 weeks prior," she said. "I checked the maintenance logs when I recommended the stand down. Those vehicles were in good condition. Anyone with access to maintenance records would know a flag on those vehicles was not standard." Hatch said nothing for a moment. "Who has access to maintenance records in your unit?" he said. "Every NCO in the motor pool and every operations officer above captain," she said. That's 14 people. Narrow it. I need the communications intercepts from the 12 hours after the convoy was stood down, she said. I need anything outbound from the post that doesn't match established personal communication patterns. That's a 4-hour pull, Hatch said. Then start it now, she said. I'll be in the intelligence shop in 20 minutes. She was in the intelligence shop in 16. The intercepts came through at 0720. She sat with them, and she worked through them with the focused speed she brought to everything that was time-critical, not rushing, which produced errors, but moving at the exact pace the situation required, which was very fast and very careful simultaneously. She found it at 0748, an outbound communication from a personal device on the post network placed at 2317, the night the convoy was stood down, routed through 2 civilian relay points that were not consumer standard services. The content was encrypted. The routing was sophisticated in a way that was not consistent with a soldier communicating with family or friends. She traced the personal device registration. The device was assigned to a name she had not expected. She sat with it. She sat with it for longer than she sat with most things, because this particular name rewrote a portion of the architecture she'd built over 19 days, and rewriting architecture, when you were 24 hours from the end of an operation, was not a small thing. The device was registered to Captain David Okafor. She thought about Okafor standing in her doorframe at 2100 on the first night. Everyone in the platoon was on your side this morning, even the ones who didn't show it. She thought about him stopping by the intelligence shop with professional questions that were also check-ins. She thought about how she'd stopped discouraging those visits had in fact begun without fully acknowledging it to appreciate them. She picked up her phone. She called Hatch. I found the 3rd channel, she said. She told him the name. Hatch didn't speak for 5 seconds. In 7 years, she had never heard him be silent for 5 consecutive seconds. You're certain, he said. The device registration is clean. The routing signature matches 2 known patterns from the signals analysis I built on the primary case. I'm certain. He's been close to you for 3 weeks, Hatch said. I know. He's been in your shop. He's had proximity to your work. I know. Did he? No, she said. I keep my work compartmented. He's had proximity to my presence, not my files. Whatever he's reported upward has been behavioral observation, not document access. The convoy stand-down, Hatch said. He would have had visibility through operations channels, she said. The maintenance flagged the timing. He put it together the same way I would have. Another pause. He's smart, Hatch said. Yes, she said. And this was the part that sat in her chest like something cold, because it was true. And it was also the most painful true thing in the situation, that the quality she'd recognized in Okafor from her first weeks at Ravenstone, the quality she'd respected, the careful intelligence and the disciplined curiosity and the instinct to pay attention, had been real. It had just been in service of something she hadn't seen. He's not Corrigan, she said. No, Hatch said. Corrigan got into this through desperation. Okafor chose it. She worked through the implication. Which means he has a reason, which means he's been doing this longer probably, and for something he believes in. That makes him considerably more dangerous, Hatch said. It makes him considerably more complicated, she said. Dangerous is a different calculation, Evelyn. Hatch's voice shifted. Became the version of his voice that appeared when he was about to say something he'd calculated carefully. I need you to understand what this changes. It changes the extraction sequence, she said. We can't run Corrigan first. We have to close all 3 simultaneously. Corrigan, Okafor, the upper source. If any one of them knows the others are compromised before we have all 3 in hand. We don't have the upper source confirmed, Hatch said. How close are you? I need the communication that went out from Okafor's device last night to complete the link, he said. If I can trace where it landed, I have the upper source. The content is encrypted, she said. The routing destination isn't, he said. Where did it route to? She looked at the intercept. She traced the relay chain. She found the destination address. She read it twice. Then she said, Hatch, The destination address routes to a server registered to a DoD contractor operating out of Fort Meade. Silence. That's not a foreign intelligence address, she said. No, Hatch said. It's not. The upper source isn't working for a foreign entity, she said. This is domestic. Yes, Hatch said. The word landed in the quiet of the intelligence shop and changed everything around it. All the architecture she'd built. The 14 months of signals activity, the compromised route, the financial pressure on Corrigan, the sophisticated 3-node network, all of it rearranged itself around a different center of gravity. Not espionage in the traditional sense. Not a foreign intelligence service running an asset through a unit NCO and a junior officer. Something else. Something that reached into Fort Meade, which meant it reached into the structure of American military intelligence from the inside. How long have you known it was domestic, she said. 6 weeks, Hatch said. She controlled her response. She controlled it very deliberately and very completely, because the alternative was an anger that would not serve the next hour. You sent me into a unit to close the access point of a domestic intelligence operation without telling me the operation was domestic, she said. If you had known, I would have operated exactly as I have operated, she said. I don't work differently based on whose flag is on the operation. I know that, he said. Then why? Because if you'd known the upper source was domestic, and you'd started looking in that direction from week 1, you would have found it faster, he said. And finding it faster from a unit that the upper source was actively monitoring through Okafor would have burned the case before it was closable. She processed this. He was right. She hated that he was right. She sat with hating it for exactly 3 seconds, and then she set it aside. You need Okafor, she said. I need the communication chain confirmed, he said. Which means I need Okafor to make one more contact with the upper source. One we control. She understood immediately what he was describing. You want to run him, she said. Briefly. One communication. Enough to confirm the destination and close the link. He'll need to believe it's real, she said. He's smart enough that anything that feels staged will burn it. That's why I'm calling you, Hatch said. She looked at the intercept on her screen. She looked at the routing chain at the destination address at the timestamp of 2317, when Okafor had been awake and watching and had correctly identified something anomalous in the convoy stand-down. What do you need the communication to say, she said. That the convoy reroute was a false alarm, Hatch said. Standard maintenance. No operational significance. So the upper source relaxes, she said. Stops the burn pattern. Goes back to normal communications. Gives us the final confirmation we need. And how do I get Okafor to send that? Hatch was quiet. She understood what his quiet meant. You need me to tell him something, she said. Something that will make him want to send that message. Yes. Something true enough that he believes it. Yes. She looked at the mountains through the intelligence shop window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle, catching the dust on the glass and turning it gold. If I do this, she said, I need to know that what happens to Okafor afterward accounts for what he does now, for the choice he makes when I give him the opening. I can't promise outcomes, Hatch said. I'm not asking for a promise, she said. I'm asking whether the people above us will see the difference between a man who chose this and cooperates to close it, and a man who chose it and burned everything on the way out. Hatch was quiet again. I'll make sure they see it, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was Hatch doing the most he could do, which in 7 years she'd learned was more than most people's promises were worth. Tell me exactly what the communication needs to contain, she said. She found Okafor in the mess hall at 0930. He was alone, which was unusual. He was eating without visible appetite, looking at nothing, and she recognized in his posture the specific quality of a person running a calculation. They can't quite finish the slightly off stillness of internal movement behind an outward performance of ordinary. He looked up when she sat across from him. Captain Hart, he said. And she watched his face do what faces do when someone who doesn't know they've been identified sits across from the person who identified them. It performed ease, performed the normal, and performed it well enough that anyone who wasn't looking for the seams wouldn't see them. She saw them. "You noticed the convoy stand down," she said. He set down his fork. Very carefully. The deliberateness of the gesture told her he'd already been carrying the tension for a while. "I noticed it was maintenance flagged," he said. "You know those vehicles were serviced 2 weeks ago," she said. He looked at her. He said nothing. "Danny," she said. His real name. She'd never used it before. She watched it land on him, the intimacy of it, the signal that whatever this conversation was, it wasn't an official approach. He held her eyes. She had to give him that. He held them. He didn't look away, didn't break, didn't do the small physical retreating that people who are afraid tend to do when the fear becomes confirmed. He sat with it. "You're not here to ask me about maintenance records," he said. "No," she said. He exhaled, a long, controlled breath. He looked at the table and then back at her. "How long?" he said. "Long enough," she said. "But that's not what matters right now." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been operating under enormous pressure for a significant period of time, and has just felt some portion of that pressure become suddenly different in character, not lighter, but changed. The specific feeling of having been found. "What matters right now," he said. "The convoy stand-down was standard maintenance," she said. "I need you to believe that, and I need you to communicate it to whoever you've been communicating with." I went very still. "Because if the person above you believes the stand-down was operationally significant," she said, "they're going to do something in the next 48 hours that burns a case we've been building for 14 months. And the case is not just about your unit. It goes up further than you know, Danny. It touches things that matter in ways you didn't agree to when you started this." He stared at her. "You're asking me to help you," he said. "I'm asking you to do the right thing," she said. "Which I think you want to do. I think you've wanted to do it for a while, and you've been trying to find a way out that doesn't cost everything, and there isn't one. There's only this." His jaw worked. She watched the calculation happening in real time. She could read it, the weighing, the fear, the piece of him that had gotten into this for reasons he'd believed in, and was now looking at where those reasons had led and what they'd cost. "What happens to me?" he said. "That depends on what you do in the next hour," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "You could have come at me officially," he said. "MPs, a formal approach." "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She held his gaze. "Because you're not Corrigan," she said. "And I needed you to understand that someone in this room knew the difference." Something broke in his face. Not dramatically, not the way things broke in films. Quietly. The way a structure settles when the load it's been holding is carefully set down. He reached for his phone. "Tell me what it needs to say," he said. She told him. He typed it. He showed it to her. It said exactly what it needed to say and nothing more. He sent it. She watched the timestamp register. She noted it. "Danny," she said. He looked up. "When someone approaches you in the next 24 hours, she said, "you tell them you want legal representation before you answer any questions. That's the only thing you say." He nodded. She stood. She left him at the table, in the corridor outside the mess hall. She stopped, and she took one breath full and controlled, and she thought about the conversation she'd just had, and the trust Okafor had placed in her reading of the situation. The trust that had been, in a complicated way, built over 3 weeks of visits to her shop, and questions, and the steady presence of a person who was watching her, and also genuinely learning from her. She thought about what it cost him to send that message. She filed it. She kept walking. Hatch called at 1340. "The communication landed," he said. "The upper source responded within 6 minutes. Normal pattern, no burn indicators. He believes it." "Good," she said. "We have the final confirmation on the destination," he said. "The upper source is Colonel Raymond Stearns, DoD contractor liaison Fort Meade, formerly G2 at CENTCOM." The name hit her with the specific weight of a name that should have been impossible. "Stearns," she said. "You know him." "I met him twice," she said. "During the posting before this one." "Did he know what you were?" she thought. She moved back through 2 meetings in 2 different rooms in a building she would not name over an unsecured channel. She thought about what Stearns had seen and what she had allowed him to see. I don't think so, she said. But I was more visible in that posting than I've been here. Evelyn. Hatch's voice changed register. If Stearns has any suspicion that the person who identified the compromised route and stood down the convoy is someone from that previous posting. He doesn't know it's me, she said. He's been getting behavioral reports through Okafor. Okafor knows me as Hart Tactical Intelligence Ravenstone. There's no connection. You're certain? I'm certain enough, she said. She heard Hatch deciding to accept that. We move tomorrow morning, he said. Simultaneous, all three. We'll coordinate with the relevant authorities on Stearns. Corrigan and Okafor will be approached by CID at 0600. Voss needs to know tonight, she said. He can't be blindsided by CID showing up in his unit at 0600. Agreed, Hatch said. You brief him. She went to Voss's office at 1800. He looked up when she came in, and something in her face told him, before she opened her mouth, that the 3 days were over. Sit down, he said. She sat. Tell me, he said. She told him everything. Not the classified sources, not the mechanism of how she'd built the case, but the outcome. Corrigan Okafor, Stearns, the domestic nature of the operation, what it had been designed to do, and for how long it had been running. She told him that CID was coming at 0600, and that they would be approaching 2 soldiers by name, and that his job tomorrow morning was to let it happen without disruption and to keep the rest of his unit steady in the aftermath. Voss listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Okafor, he said. Yes. He looked at the wall. I've worked with him for 2 years, he said. He stopped, started over. I recommended him for the advanced course. I wrote the recommendation myself. He's good at his job, she said. That's partly what made him useful to the people who recruited him. What did they tell him? Voss said. To get him to... I don't know the specific terms, she said. But my read is that he believed he was serving something, that there was a justification that made sense to him when he was offered it. She paused. That doesn't make it right. It makes it complicated. And Corrigan? Corrigan was desperate, she said. He was offered a way out of a financial situation he couldn't solve any other way. He took it. Voss pressed his hands flat on his desk. She watched him carry at the weight of 2 names that his unit had relied on 2 people he'd trusted with the safety of the soldiers in his charge. She knew this weight. She'd been watching him build toward it for 20 days. What do I tell the unit? He said. Tomorrow morning after CID, you tell them exactly what you're authorized to tell them, she said. That there was an investigation, that it's been resolved that the unit's integrity is intact. The details are classified. That's not enough, he said. It's what you have, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression was stripped in a way she hadn't seen before, not broken, but cleaned of the armor he wore so consistently that she'd almost forgotten it was armor. When this is over, he said, you leave. Yes, she said. New assignment. That's generally how it works. He nodded once. He looked at his desk. You know what I thought when I dragged you out in front of that formation? You thought you were demonstrating a principle, she said. I thought I was demonstrating that this unit ran on proven strength and that unverified people needed to earn their place. He paused. I thought I was right. You were wrong about the method, she said. You weren't entirely wrong about the principle. He looked at her sharply. Strength matters, she said. Proven capability matters. You just had a limited definition of what those things look like. She held his gaze. You've expanded it. He sat with that. The soldiers, he said. Reed, Lair, Watkins. They don't know what you actually were, what you were actually doing here. No, she said. Should they? She thought about it honestly. They know what they need to know, she said. They saw enough on the training field to update their understanding of what capable people look like. That's the lesson that's going to stay with them. The rest, the investigation, the case, that's my work, not their story. He was quiet. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to be a hard morning. She stood. Hart, he said. She waited. "Thank you," he said, not as a commander thanking a subordinate, as a person who had been shown something true at considerable expense and was acknowledging finally and plainly that the showing had mattered. She nodded once. She walked out. The post was quieter at 1830 than it was at other hours, the institutional energy having shifted from the intensity of the workday toward something more human. The sounds of people's lives instead of their jobs. She heard laughter from somewhere, and someone's music, and a phone call that was close enough to catch half the words, something about being home soon. She walked back to the intelligence shop. She had one more thing to do before tomorrow. She opened her computer, and she opened the report that had been building in its current form for 20 days and its actual form for 11 weeks, and she completed it. She wrote the last 3 pages with the same precision she'd given the first 100, and when she was done, she read it once from the beginning, checking it the way she checked everything for gaps, for assumptions, presented as conclusions for any place where the evidence stopped being sufficient. It was sufficient. She sent it to Hatch at 21:43. She closed her computer. She sat in the quiet of the shop for a moment, and she allowed herself something she rarely allowed in the middle of an operation, a full, unguarded awareness of what the last 23 days had been. The training field, and the cold morning, and 398 pairs of eyes, and Voss's face when she'd stood back up from the demonstration. Watkins appearing at mile 2 of a 6-mile run, and simply running there. Lear, 19 years old and earnest to the point of sometimes being painful, asking how she'd known what Reed was going to do. Okafor in the mess hall reaching for his phone, choosing the harder thing when she'd given him the opening. She sat with all of it for exactly as long as she could afford to. Then she stood up. She turned off the light. She walked out of the intelligence shop and into the Colorado night, where the mountains were invisible in the dark, but completely present the way some things always were not seen, but known, and heavy, and permanent. Tomorrow was going to arrive fast. She was ready. CID arrived at 0548, 12 minutes early, which told her they were running on real urgency rather than procedural precision. She was already at her desk when she heard the vehicles, 3 of them she estimated from the sound, and she didn't go to the window because she didn't need to see it. She'd built this. She knew exactly what it looked like. Voss met them at the entrance. She knew this because she'd told him to, because the alternative was CID moving through his unit without a commanding officer present, which would generate a specific kind of institutional chaos that served no one. He'd been awake since before she arrived. She'd seen his office light on when she'd walked past at 0520. The post came alive in the wrong way at 0600. Not the normal morning energy of a unit beginning its day, something different, something with an edge to it. The particular atmosphere of a place where something has happened before most people knew anything was happening. She heard it through the walls of the intelligence shop, the shift in foot traffic, the voices at a register that wasn't routine, the specific silence of people stopping to look at something they didn't understand. Watkins appeared in her doorframe at 0617. She didn't knock. She stood there and looked at Evelyn, and her face said everything. Her mouth wasn't saying yet, which was, "I know something is happening, and I know you know what it is, and I need you to tell me something true." "Close the door," Evelyn said. Watkins came in. She closed the door. She sat down. "2 names," Watkins said. "That's what I'm hearing. CID pulled 2 people out of morning formation before it even started. Who?" Evelyn looked at her. She thought about what she could say and what she couldn't, and she found the line, the same way she always found it, not by rule, but by what the person in front of her actually needed. "I can't give you names," she said. "You'll have them by end of day. What I can tell you is that your soldiers are safe. The operation that compromised your unit has been closed. The people who were doing it are in custody." Watkins stared at her. "How long?" she said, not a question. The way it came out, it was an accusation with the anger taken out of it, just the bare shape of how long have you known, and how long were we not knowing, and what did that cost us? "Long enough to close it properly," Evelyn said. "The convoy," Watkins said. "Yes." Watkins put both hands flat on the desk. She looked at the surface of the desk, and she breathed, and Evelyn let her breathe, and did not fill the silence with anything. 23 soldiers, Watkins said. Yes. They don't know. No, Evelyn said. They think it was maintenance. Watkins looked up. Her eyes were steady, but carrying something behind the steadiness, the specific weight of a senior NCO who had spent 22 years understanding that her job was to know what was happening to the people she was responsible for, and who had just discovered that for some portion of the last 11 weeks, she had been in the dark about something that mattered. You should have told me, she said. No, Evelyn said. I shouldn't have, and you know that. Watkins held her gaze for a long moment. Yeah, she said finally. I know that. She stood. She straightened her jacket with the automatic precision of someone whose body performs military correctness without being asked. The unit's going to have questions. Voss will address them, Evelyn said. He knows what he can say. And you? Evelyn looked at her. Watkins understood the look. You're leaving, she said. Soon, Evelyn said. Watkins nodded once. It was the nod of a person accepting something they don't like because they understand it is what it is, and fighting it changes nothing about what it is. You know what the worst part is, Watkins said. Tell me. I'm going to have to explain to Kowalski that the $20 I won off him are more complicated than he thinks. She paused. He thought you were just a good fighter. He had no idea. Most people didn't, Evelyn said. That was the point, Watkins said. That was the point, Evelyn said. Watkins left. Evelyn heard her in the corridor, the controlled, purposeful footsteps of a woman who had processed something hard and was already moving toward the next thing that needed doing, which was the only way Evelyn had ever seen Watkins move. She turned back to her desk. She had a report to finalize and a handoff package to complete, and approximately 4 hours before the institutional cascade of the morning's events would require her direct participation. She used all 4 hours. She worked with the focused completeness she brought to endings, which required more care than middles, because middles could be corrected, and endings could not. At 1100 Hatch called. Stearns is in custody, he said. The Fort Meade coordination completed at 0830. He was picked up without incident. He didn't run, she said. He didn't think we had him, Hatch said. He thought Okafor's last communication meant the operation was still clean. She thought about Okafor in the mess hall, reaching for his phone, choosing the thing that cost him more than anything else in that moment was going to cost him. She thought about what it had taken in the end for him to send that message. The cooperation he showed yesterday morning, she said. Hatch, that has to matter. I've already made the representation, he said. The people handling his case have the full account, including the specific nature of his cooperation and the conditions under which it occurred. You told them it wasn't coerced. I told them it was chosen, he said, clearly and without duress, on a 30-second timeline with full understanding of the consequences. She let out a breath. Corrigan, she said. Similar, he said. The financial background is documented. The circumstances of recruitment are part of the record. He's not getting out of this, Evelyn. Neither of them is. But the record is complete, and the record will be read by people who understand what complete means. That's all I asked for, she said. I know, Hatch said. That's one of the things that makes you difficult to work with. She almost smiled. You're going to miss me. I'm going to miss the quality of your case documentation, he said. You I can do without. It was the warmest thing he'd said to her in 7 years. She understood it as such. What's next? She said. 2 weeks administrative stand-down, he said. Full debrief. Then we'll talk about the next assignment. Where? Somewhere you haven't been, he said. That's a short list at this point. Getting shorter, he said. Get through today first. The call ended. She sat for a moment. Somewhere you haven't been. She'd been to 8 countries in 4 years, and she'd been here at Ravenstone for 11 weeks. That had felt like a different kind of foreign country. The country of being seen or almost seen, of being close enough to people that their lives had texture and weight in a way that lives in operational environments didn't always get to have. She'd watched a 19-year-old ask questions about how to read people, and a 44-year-old NCO appear at mile 2 of a 6-mile run, and a lieutenant reorganize his understanding of intelligence support, and a staff sergeant sit up from the dirt and say, "Yes, ma'am," instead of "Yes, Captain," and mean something different by it. She had not planned to leave with any of that mattering. It mattered anyway. She got up. She walked to Voss's office. He was on the phone when she arrived. He saw her through the open door and held up one finger a minute, and she waited in the corridor and listened to him handle the call, which was someone senior asking questions about the morning's activity, and Voss giving measured, precise answers that revealed exactly what they were authorized to contain. He hung up. She came in. He looked like someone who had been awake since before DO 500 and had spent the intervening hours doing something that required every form of discipline he possessed. He looked, in other words, exactly like what he was. "How are they taking it?" she said. "Badly," he said. "Well, both." He leaned back. "The soldiers who knew them are—" He stopped. "You can't explain this kind of thing to people in a way that makes it clean. You can only tell them the facts you're authorized to tell them and watch them try to build something they can live with out of the pieces." "That's what you're doing too," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I am." He paused. "I addressed the unit at 0800. After CID had completed, I told them there had been a counterintelligence investigation, that it had concluded successfully, that 2 members of the unit had been involved in activity that compromised operational security, and that the investigation had prevented harm to soldiers of this unit." He stopped. "I didn't tell them about the convoy." "No," she said. "Should I have?" She thought about it honestly. "Not yet," she said. "When the case is fully adjudicated and the information can be released, they'll know. Then they'll understand what was actually prevented. Right now, knowing almost everything is harder than knowing what you told them." He nodded. He'd already arrived at the same conclusion, she could tell. He was checking his thinking against hers, the way she'd seen him do several times in the last 10 days, a habit that had developed without either of them formally acknowledging it. "Reed asked me directly," Voss said, "after the formation, whether any of this was connected to Hart." She waited. "I told him that Captain Hart's work was classified, and that what I could say was that this unit was safer for her presence here than it would have been without it." He looked at her. "Is that accurate?" "It's accurate," she said. "He didn't ask anything else," Voss said. "He said, 'Yes, sir,' and he walked away, and I watched him, and I could see him putting something together in his head. I don't know what shape he's putting it in." "He'll put it in the right shape," she said. "Give him time." Voss looked at his desk, then back at her. "When do you leave?" "I'll have orders by end of week," she said. "I'll be gone before the weekend." He nodded slowly. "The Silver Star," she said. He looked up. "On your record," she said. "What was it for?" He studied her. "Why?" "Because I've been here 11 weeks, and I've watched you lead, and I understand more now about the kind of officer you are than I did on the training field that morning," she said. "And I want to know if it's what I think it is." He was quiet for a moment. "Fallujah," he said. 2006. 3 soldiers cut off from their element during a clearance operation. I went back in. He said it without performance, without the inflation that military stories sometimes acquired in the telling. Just the plain fact of it. "Anyone else could have done it," she said. "Probably," he said. "But you did." "I did," he said. She nodded. "That's what I thought," she said. He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means that what happened on the training field 9 days ago was not who you are," she said. "It was a failure of a specific kind that comes from building your identity around one definition of strength for too long. But the man who went back into Fallujah for 3 soldiers is the same man who stood down a convoy on a maintenance flag because someone told him the route was compromised." She held his gaze. "Those 2 things live in the same person." He was very still. "The soldiers you lead," she said. "They need both. They need the man who went back in, and they need the man who was willing to update his understanding of who else might be worth going back in for." She paused. "You've been that man this week. All week." He looked away. He looked at the wall to his left, which had a unit crest and a calendar and a photograph she'd never let herself examine closely enough to see who was in it. "You're a strange person to have in a unit," he said. "I know," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know," she said again. He stood. She stood. They were on the same side of the desk for the first time since the conversation after the training field, and the geometry of it was different from all the conversations before. Less adversarial, less managed, just two people who had gone through something together and were now standing at the end of it with the full weight of what it had been between them. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, and not performed the handshake of a person with nothing left to prove in this room. "For the record," he said, "I knew you were right from the second day." "The second day," she said. "When you ran the 6 miles without showing anything, and I spent the whole run watching you not show anything." He paused. "I knew. I just didn't know what to do with knowing." "You figured it out," she said. "Eventually," he said. She left his office. In the corridor she passed Corporal Justin Lair, who was moving in the opposite direction with a folder under his arm, and the general expression of a young soldier trying to look like he had places to be. He saw her and stopped. "Captain Hart," he said. "Corporal Lear," she said. He looked at her with everything he wanted to ask visible on his face, which was his most consistent characteristic. His face had not yet learned to contain its contents. "Is it true," he said, "that you—" He stopped, reorganized. "There's a lot of things going around. About you and what happened this morning and what you were actually doing here." "There are always a lot of things going around," she said. "Yeah, but—" He stopped again. He looked at her with the specific earnestness of 19 and 6 months out of training, and a question he couldn't quite shape. "Were you protecting us the whole time?" She looked at him for a moment. "I was doing my job," she said. "Is that the same thing?" She thought about 23 soldiers scheduled for a road at 0400 in the dark, and a maintenance flag, and the sound of Hatch's voice saying simultaneous, all three and Okafor in the mess hall, making the choice that cost him everything to make. "Yes," she said. "In this case, it's the same thing." Lear nodded. He looked like someone receiving a piece of information he was going to spend years understanding fully. "You said you could teach some of it," he said. "How to read people. How to know what's coming before it arrives." "I did say that," she said. "I've been practicing," he said. She looked at him. She actually looked at him at the 19-year-old earnestness and the 6 months of military bearing that hadn't yet fully replaced the person underneath it, and the quality of attention that she'd noticed from his front row position on the training field. "You have potential," she said. His face did the thing it did. "Don't let it make you arrogant," she said. "The second you think you know what's coming is the second you stop paying attention to what's actually there." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked past him. She heard him 10 seconds later, moving in his original direction with slightly faster footsteps than before, the particular movement of a person who has just received something they needed and is carrying it carefully. She let herself have that. She let herself have the whole of it. Lear and his questions. Watkins and her $20. Reed saying "yes, ma'am" in the dirt. Okafor choosing the hard thing at the last possible moment. Voss extending his hand like someone who had learned what he was extending it to and had extended it anyway. She let herself have it for as long as it took her to walk from Voss's corridor to the door of the intelligence shop. Then she went in and she sat down and she opened the handoff package and she worked. The handoff package was the final act of any assignment. The document that contained everything she could pass forward to whoever came next, structured so that the work she'd done didn't die with her departure. She'd built good handoffs, and she'd built adequate handoffs, and she'd built one early in her career that she still thought about because she'd left something out that she shouldn't have left out. She didn't leave things out anymore. She wrote for 3 hours. At 1:30, Marcus Reed knocked on the open door of the intelligence shop. She looked up. He was in PT uniform, which meant he'd come from the gym or from an afternoon session, and he was carrying 2 cups of coffee, one of which he held toward her with the specific expression of a man who has thought about whether to do something and has decided to do it regardless of whether the outcome makes him look like he misjudged the situation. She took the coffee. He sat down across from her. Nobody had invited him to sit. He sat the way Watkins sat, like someone who has made a decision about where they're going to be and is simply being there. "Voss told us as much as he could this morning," Reed said, which wasn't much. "No," she said. "The things he didn't say were louder than the things he said," Reed said. "People who've been in long enough know how to read what a commander doesn't tell you." "What did they read?" she said. "That we were in something we didn't fully know we were in," Reed said, "and that somebody got us out of it before we knew we needed getting out." He drank his coffee. "And that the somebody was probably sitting in the intelligence shop." She said nothing. "The convoy," he said. She looked at him. "The maintenance flag," he said. "Those vehicles were serviced 2 weeks ago. I know because I was there when they came out of the shop. Kowalski signed off on them." He paused. "A flag on those vehicles wasn't maintenance." She held his gaze. 23 soldiers, he said. 4th platoon. My guys are in 4th platoon." He looked at his coffee cup. 3 of them have kids under 5. Hendricks is getting married in April." She waited. "Thank you," he said. It was the second time in 12 hours someone had said those 2 words to her in that specific way. Not as a formality, not as a social ritual, but as the only words that existed for what they were trying to express. "I was doing my job," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You were." He stood. He took his coffee cup with him. At the door he stopped and turned. "For what it's worth, the whole thing on the training field, I've thought about it a lot since that morning. What I should have done." "You did what the situation allowed," she said. "I should have said something before it started," he said. "I knew it was wrong. I went along with it because he outranked me, and because I told myself I'd be careful." "Reed," she said. He looked at her. "You sat up from the dirt and you said yes, ma'am," she said. In front of 398 people. That was the moment that mattered. He looked at her for a long beat. "Good luck," he said. "Wherever they're sending you." "You too," she said. He left. She drank the coffee. It was, she noticed, made correctly. The right temperature, the right ratio, the kind of coffee that someone makes when they've been paying attention to how other people take it. She didn't know when Reed had noticed how she took her coffee. She filed it in the same internal space as everything else that had accumulated in 11 weeks, the specific texture of a place where people had watched her and she had watched them, and something had passed between all of that watching. That was more than intelligence and less than friendship, and precisely what it needed to be for everything that had happened here to have been possible. She went back to the handoff package. She finished it at 18:20. She read it once, confirmed it was complete, confirmed it said what it needed to say, confirmed there was nothing missing. She sent it. She closed her computer. She sat in the intelligence shop one more time, in the quiet of early evening, with the day's work done, and the work she'd come here to do, fully completed, and she allowed herself the thing she rarely allowed a full stop. Not moving to the next item. Not planning the debrief, or the next assignment, or the administrative requirements of the stand-down. Just sitting with where she was and what it had been. 23 days since Voss had called her name in front of 398 soldiers. 11 weeks since she'd arrived at Fort Ravenstone with a cover and a mission and instructions to stay beneath the radar. 1 operational network closed. 3 people in custody whose freedom and careers had ended because they'd made choices that cost other people their safety. 1 domestic intelligence operation that had been running for 14 months without anyone at the unit level knowing it existed, shut down before it could do the damage it was being positioned to do. And something else. Something that hadn't been in the mission parameters and that Hatch would not include in his assessment because it was not the kind of thing that fit into assessment language. A 19-year-old corporal who was going to spend the next decade thinking about how to read what people were going to do before they did it. A staff sergeant who had reorganized his understanding of what it meant to take someone seriously. An NCO who had run at mile 2 and stayed for reasons she'd never explained and never needed to. A lieutenant who had walked into the hardest choice of his life in a mess hall on a Tuesday morning and come out the other side of it, having shown what kind of person he was and been seen. A major who had gone to Fallujah in 2006 for 3 soldiers and who had 48 hours ago shaken the hand of the person he'd tried to diminish in public and meant every bit of it. These things were not in the mission parameters. They were the real account of what had happened at Fort Ravenstone. She stood up. She walked out of the intelligence shop for the last time, not knowing it was the last time, which was how all the last times in her life had happened, recognized only after, never in the moment, because the moment was always occupied by the next thing that needed doing. She walked across the post in the early dark, and the mountains she couldn't see were where they always were, permanent and indifferent and present. And she breathed the cold Colorado air, and she thought about nothing in particular, and everything at once, the way she did when a thing was finished and the mind could finally move across it freely. Her orders came 3 days later. She read them. She packed what she'd brought, which was not much, because she'd learned long ago to carry only what she could afford to leave behind. She signed the administrative paperwork. She said the necessary goodbyes, which were brief and not insufficient. Watkins walked her to the vehicle. They stood there for a moment without saying anything, which was appropriate. They had said what they needed to say, and the rest of it lived in the space between the words, which was where the things that actually mattered usually lived. "Kowalski still owes me $20, Watkins said. "Collect," Evelyn said. Watkins almost smiled. "You going to be okay wherever you're going?" "I'm always okay," Evelyn said. "That's not what I asked." Evelyn looked at her. She thought about the honest answer, which was more complicated than yes, and simpler than anything she could explain, standing next to a vehicle with a driver waiting. "Yeah," she said. "I'll be okay." Watkins nodded once. She stepped back. Evelyn got in. The vehicle moved. She didn't look back. She never looked back, not because she was indifferent to what she was leaving, but because looking back was not a luxury she had learned to afford. The work ahead required the same forward attention as the work behind, and dividing that attention was the beginning of the kind of error that cost people things they couldn't get back. But she held it all of it as the post receded and the road opened up and the mountains finally appeared in the daylight, visible now, solid, exactly where they had always been. She held what it had been. The woman who had arrived at Fort Ravenstone 11 weeks ago as a ghost, deliberately invisible professionally, unremarkable, built to pass through without leaving a mark, had done something different than what was planned. She had left a mark. Not on the record, not in the documented outcome of the operation, not in any file that anyone without a specific clearance would ever be permitted to read. In the people. That was where she had always done her most important work, and it was never the work she was sent to do, and it was always the work that lasted longest after she was gone. 398 soldiers had watched a decorated major try to put her in her place on a training field on a cold Colorado morning, and what every single one of them carried forward, without knowing the full story, without access to the classified account, without understanding the 14 months of work that had concluded the morning CID arrived, was something that didn't require the full story to be true. That the quiet person in the room might be the most important one in it. That the person who doesn't tell you what they've done has very often done the most. That strength comes in forms that rank cannot see. That experience doesn't always announce itself, that the soldier who stands in the rain without opening an umbrella might be standing there for reasons that would make you ashamed you ever doubted them. Evelyn Hart had never needed 398 people to know her name. She had only ever needed the people beside her to come home. They had. That was enough. That had always been enough.